Most people just wasted the most powerful reset of the year without realizing it. And the ones who didn't waste it are currently in the process of undoing it, not through bad intentions, not through lack of awareness, but through the very specific set of mistakes that almost everyone makes in the first days of a new cycle, when the energy suddenly shifts from slow and heavy to fast and clear. When the momentum returns, something in the human nervous system overcorrects. And that overcorrection, in the first fragile days of a new beginning, can send you in exactly the wrong direction with exactly the kind of speed that makes it difficult to course correct later. March 22nd is 3 days after the Pisces new moon arrived and reset the emotional foundation of the cycle. It is 2 days after Mercury stationed direct and the equinox arrived and the sun moved into Aries and the astrological new year began. If you have been paying any degree of attention to what this period has been asking of you, you know that the weeks leading up to March 19th and 20th were some of the most interior-facing, excavating, returning to unfinished things weeks of the year. The retrograde, the balsamic depth, the Pisces dissolving of comfortable stories, all of that was doing something real. It was producing something, a quality of honest self-knowledge, and a set of genuine insights about your life and your patterns and your direction that, if properly used, would give the new cycle an unusually solid and honest foundation. If properly used. The mistakes being made right now, in this very early and very consequential phase of the new cycle, are mostly mistakes of use, of how people are responding to the return of momentum, of what they're doing with the forward energy now that it's here. And because the new cycle is only days old, the direction being set by these first choices and actions and responses is still remarkably easy to correct, but only if you can see what you're doing clearly enough to change course. Only if you're willing to look honestly at whether the way you're moving right now is taking you toward what the entire retrograde period was trying to prepare you for, or whether you're already, 3 days in, beginning to replicate the patterns that the retrograde was trying to help you leave behind. The first mistake is the most common one, and it is so understandable that it barely feels like a mistake while it's happening. It feels like relief. It feels like finally getting to move again after weeks of everything being stuck. It feels like the natural response to the return of momentum, and in that feeling of relief and motion, it carries you right past the very clarity the retrograde just spent weeks delivering to you. The mistake is moving too fast. Acting on the first impulse of the new energy, without pausing to check whether that impulse is coming from the honest place the retrograde just opened, or from the old patterns the retrograde was trying to surface and release. Here is how it plays out. For weeks you were in the depth of the retrograde, going inward, sitting with difficult feelings, being honest with yourself about patterns and relationships and choices. That work was demanding. It required you to be still when your instinct was to move, to feel when your instinct was to manage, to be honest when the honest version was uncomfortable. And now the energy has shifted. Mercury is direct. Aries is initiating. The forward current is running. And something in you, something that has been compressed and held still throughout the entire retrograde period, releases with a rush of momentum and wants to move as fast as possible toward anything that feels like forward. The phone call made on impulse to the person whose return during the retrograde stirred up all that unresolved feeling, before you finished processing what the stirring was telling you. The decision made in the first hours of Mercury direct that uses the return of clarity as an excuse to act without fully integrating what the period of confusion was producing. The big move in a direction that feels exciting and new and Aries forward, without asking whether that direction was chosen from the honest self-knowledge of the retrograde, or from the relief of the retrograde being over. Speed, in the first days of a new cycle, before the foundations of that cycle are established, does what speed always does to things that haven't yet had time to root. It topples them before they can stabilize. The new year needs these first days for its roots to set, not for its branches to race upward. And the way you let the roots set is by bringing the same quality of honest presence to your first actions that the retrograde was cultivating in your inner life for the past several weeks. Moving with intention, rather than just with momentum. Asking whether what you're about to do is coming from your new, clearer, more honest place, or from the old automatic pilot that the retrograde interrupted. The test is simple. Before you act on the impulse of the new energy, ask yourself one honest question. Is this coming from the understanding I gained, or from the relief that the understanding period is over? If you can answer that question honestly, the mistake of moving too fast becomes much harder to make. The second mistake is quieter and in some ways more insidious, because it disguises itself as wisdom. It disguises itself as integration, as patience, as the responsible choice not to rush. But underneath those reasonable-sounding justifications, what it actually is avoidance of the action that the entire previous period was building you toward. The mistake is ignoring the signals. Specifically, the signals that arrived during the retrograde with unusual clarity and that are still present in the first days of the new cycle, still pointing towards something that needs attention, but that the return of forward energy and the general sense of new beginning makes it very tempting to simply move past without addressing. During the retrograde, certain things became clear to you, not all at once, and not always comfortably. Patterns in your behavior that you recognized. Truths about a relationship or a direction or a choice that you finally allowed yourself to see. A conversation that needed to happen. A decision that had been deferred too long. An emotional reality about your own life that the retrograde's honesty finally made unavoidable. These things arrived with the particular clarity of insights earned through difficulty, which means they arrived with weight. With the kind of felt truth that is hard to unfeel once it has been felt. And now the new cycle is here, and the energy is forward and initiating in Aries bold, and there is a very powerful pull towards simply moving into the new rather than doing the remaining work of the old. Toward treating the new astrological year as a clean slate, a reason to leave behind everything the retrograde surfaced, including the unresolved things that still need resolution, because the new year is here and you are ready to move forward. The problem is that the unresolved things don't care about your new year. They don't pack themselves away because the calendar turned or the retrograde ended. They come with you. They continue shaping your choices and your patterns and your relationships from below the surface of the new beginning energy, operating as steadily as they were operating during the retrograde, just less visibly, because the new momentum makes them easier to outrun, until you can't outrun them anymore, until the new cycle is weeks old, and you find yourself back in a familiar dynamic, a familiar emotional landscape, a familiar pattern of choices that produces familiar results. And you realize that the new beginning didn't actually produce something new, it just produced a new version of the same situation, because the thing underneath the situation that the retrograde was trying to help you see was never addressed. It was noticed and then bypassed in the relief and momentum of the new cycle beginning. The signals are still present on March 22nd. The things the retrograde was pointing toward have not disappeared because 3 days have passed. And the most valuable thing you can do with the forward energy of this new cycle is use it to do something about what those signals were pointing toward, not to outrun the signals by moving so fast and so forward that they temporarily lose sight of you, because they will always find you again. The retrograde will see to that. The third mistake is the one with the longest consequences, and it is also the one that is most difficult to catch because it operates at the level of the story you're telling yourself rather than at the level of the actions you're taking. It is the mistake of stepping into the new cycle as the same version of yourself that entered the retrograde, as if the weeks of excavation and depth and honesty produced nothing, changed nothing, revealed nothing worth incorporating into how you move through the world. The retrograde period does not change you automatically. It creates the conditions for change. It surfaces what needs to be seen. It returns what needs attention. It dissolves the comfortable stories long enough for the less comfortable truth to be visible. But what you do with the visibility is entirely up to you. And the most common way that people fail to use what the retrograde made visible is not by actively rejecting it. It is by forgetting it in the rush of the new beginning. by letting the fresh energy of the new cycle sweep them forward so quickly that the honesty of the retrograde period becomes something that happened in the past rather than something that is actively informing the present. You know what the retrograde showed you? Somewhere in the past several weeks, you had a moment or several moments of genuine clarity about something in your life that you had been relating to without full honesty. A pattern you recognized, a truth you finally acknowledged, a version of a situation that you finally stopped softening. Those moments of honest recognition were the retrograde's gift to you, and they came with an implicit invitation. Now that you see this, do something different with it. Let it change how you move. Let it inform how you choose. Let it be the difference between this new cycle and the ones that came before it. The mistake of stepping into the new cycle as the same person is the mistake of receiving the gift without opening it, of having the clarity available and then proceeding exactly as you would have proceeded before the clarity arrived, of taking the Aries energy and the Mercury direct momentum and the New Year's initiating force and using all of it to move faster and more boldly in the same direction you were already moving, rather than in the direction the retrograde was trying to redirect you toward. This shows up as the same relational dynamic resumed at higher speed, the same work pattern reestablished with more energy, the same emotional habits brought into the new cycle with new justifications, the same avoidance given a new story, the same choices made from the same unconscious place, dressed in the language of a new beginning. And the reason it's the most consequential mistake is that the new cycle is only days old. The patterns being established right now are the patterns that will govern the weeks ahead. The direction being set by these first choices is the direction the cycle will travel. Changing course 3 weeks from now is possible, but harder. Changing course today, while the cycle is still in its first hours of establishing its trajectory, is something that the forward momentum of the new year will actually support and accelerate rather than resist. The retrograde gave you clarity. The Pisces new moon gave you depth and honest emotional reset. The equinox and the sun in Aries gave you the forward energy to do something with it. The full power of what all of this period has been working to produce is only available if you bring the honest version of yourself, the one that the retrograde was helping you become, into the new cycle consciously and deliberately. If you let what you learned actually change something, if you step forward as someone who knows something now that they didn't know when the cycle began, and who is making choices from that knowledge rather than simply moving faster in the old direction. There is a fourth error running quietly alongside the first three, and it is the one that tends to perpetuate all the others. It is the mistake of not doing the inventory, of not pausing on a day like today to look honestly at how you have been moving since the energy shifted, to assess, with the same honest attention the retrograde was cultivating, whether the first days of this new cycle have been used well, or whether the mistakes being described right now are ones you are currently making. Most people, when they hear a description of a mistake they're making, will either immediately recognize themselves in it or will immediately identify someone else they know who makes that mistake. What most people are less quick to do is apply it reflexively and honestly to their own behavior in the hours and days since the energy shifted. To genuinely ask, have I been moving too fast? Have I been bypassing the signals the retrograde surfaced in favor of the momentum of the new? Have I been bringing my honest, updated, retrograde-informed self into the new cycle? Or have I been bringing the version of myself who predates all of that honesty? Those questions, applied honestly and specifically to the actual choices you've made since March 19th, not in general, but specifically in the particular conversations and decisions and actions of the last few days, are the inventory. And the inventory is the first act of the new cycle done well. The first evidence that the retrograde's gift was received and not set aside. The first demonstration that the new year is beginning from a different, more honest place than the previous cycle ended. The inventory doesn't require self-punishment. It doesn't require undoing every choice made in the first days of the new cycle, or treating the mistakes as failures, or drowning the forward energy of the new year in the backward pull of self-criticism. It It requires honesty, which is something the entire period leading up to today has been practicing with you. And it requires the willingness to correct course while the cycle is still young and the correction is relatively easy to make. Because the new cycle is 3 days old. 3 days in which direction the mistakes made are reversible. 3 days in, the patterns established are still loose enough to adjust. 3 days in, you still have the full initiating energy of the new year available to you, and that energy is as useful for course correction as it is for forward motion. Maybe more so. Here is what all 3 mistakes have in common, and it is the thing that, once seen, makes them much easier to avoid. They are all, in different ways, forms of rushing past the transition, of treating the end of the retrograde and the beginning of the new cycle as a switch, old energy off, new energy on, rather than as a threshold that requires crossing consciously, with full awareness of what you are leaving behind and full intention around what you are moving toward. A threshold crossed unconsciously is still crossed. The new cycle begins regardless. But there is an enormous difference between entering a new cycle as someone who is awake to the transition, who knows what the previous cycle produced in terms of hard-won clarity and honest self-knowledge, and who is deliberately bringing that into the new direction, and entering a new cycle as someone who simply moved from one side to the other because that's where the momentum was going. The retrograde period you've been moving through was not a gap in your life. It was not time lost or time endured. It was time that produced something specific and valuable and, if used well, irreplaceable. It produced a version of you that is more honest about certain things than you were before it began, more clear about certain patterns, more aware of certain truths you'd been avoiding, more connected to what you actually want and why, as distinct from what you've been telling yourself you want. That version of you is the version the new cycle deserves to begin with. And the only thing that brings that version into the new cycle is the conscious choice, made today on March 22nd, while the cycle is still 3 days old and the trajectory is still being set, to carry the retrograde's honest gift forward rather than outrunning it in the excitement of the new beginning. The practical question for today is the one that follows directly from understanding these mistakes. It is not a complicated question, and it does not require a complicated answer. It requires an honest one. In the 3 days since the Pisces new moon and the equinox and Mercury stationing direct, have you been moving from the honest, clarified, retrograde-informed place? Or have you been moving from the relief of the retrograde being over? If the answer is the honest, clarified place, then continue. The forward energy of the new cycle will carry what is moving from that place toward outcomes that the previous cycle could not have produced. The roots are set well, and the growth will reflect it. If the answer is the relief of it being over, then today is the day to pause and recalibrate. Not to stop, not to undo what's been done, but to bring the honest self back into contact with the direction you've been moving in, and to ask whether it's the direction the retrograde's clarity was pointing toward. To slow down enough to check. To let the honest question, is this coming from the new version or the old habit? Be asked about the specific choices and conversations and actions of the past 3 days. And then to move forward from the honest answer to that question, rather than from the momentum that doesn't want to be slowed down. The new cycle is 3 days old. That is a fact worth sitting with, because it means the full arc of what this cycle will become is almost entirely still ahead of you. The mistakes being made in these first days are real, but recoverable. The patterns being established are real, but still loose. The direction being set is real, but still adjustable. And the extraordinary thing about the convergence that happened on March 19th and 20th, the Pisces new moon, Mercury direct, the equinox, the sun into Aries, the new astrological year, is that the energy of all of those initiating forces is still fully present in the cycle, still available, still active. The new year is not weeks old. It is 3 days old. The Aries energy is still fresh. The Mercury direct clarity is still at its most potent. The emotional reset of the Pisces new moon is still active and still accessible. You have, right now on March 22nd, essentially the same quality of initiating energy available that was present on March 20th. With the added advantage of 2 days of experience that can tell you something about whether you've been using it well. The inventory available today, the honest assessment of the first days of the cycle, is not an indulgence in self-criticism. It is one of the most practically powerful things you can do in the first week of a new astrological year. It is the course correction while the course is still being set. Take the inventory, ask the honest question, catch the mistake if it's being made, and then move forward from the clarified, honest, retrograde-informed place that everything this period has been building in you. Because the new cycle is here, and it is young, and what it becomes is still, largely, powerfully, consequentially, up to you. The awareness that brought you here, to this video, to this level of attention to what this period has been asking of you, that awareness is the antidote to every mistake described today. Use it consciously. Apply it to your own recent choices without flinching. Let it be what it actually is, the ongoing expression of the honest, clearer, more self-knowing version of yourself that the retrograde was working to help you become. That version belongs in this new cycle. Today is the day to make sure it's the one showing up.